You sure this bond is going to help us, Father? I have a very bad feeling.
A bad feeling should be the damn least you have, son.
Blood Knights. This is a game that I swear I saw on sale on Xbox 360 for like $1 like every single month after the Xbox One came out. So if that's any indication about how well this game sold or its quality, well, there's that, I guess. After playing through this game, I can tell you one thing with full certainty. It is definitely a video game of some description. I mean, I played through it and I'm not entirely sure what that description is, but we'll slowly work there together, I think. The first thing I noticed about this game is when you start it up, for some reason, the game menu defaults to exit game. So like, it's almost like this game is just so sure you don't want to play it that it's just like, look, okay, we get it. I'll prepare you to leave because you don't want to be here. It's almost actively encouraging you not to play it, which is, well, really, it sets the tone for the rest of the game. I'll just say that. Now, the story follows Jeremy, vampire hunter of Rome, known primarily for being a generic gruff man guy and having a really wicked looking cracked chest plate, which, to be fair, I like that design choice. I think it's kind of got a cool motif. Good on you, Jeremy. Unfortunately, on a quest to defeat all the vampires ever and recover a ancient relic that is going to be misused, his entire raid party wipes. So, in a drastic measure, a priest happens to bond his soul to that of a vampire they captured, even though they're vampire hunters and wouldn't capture but instead kill them. Also, the way they introduce Eliza's really kind of awkward, because for the first few cutscenes, she's just sort of not acknowledged and she's actively standing off to one side of the camera and she's just sort of there. And it's like, okay, who is this woman? Why is she here? Why is no one acknowledging her? And why is she wearing hot pants and no one's acknowledging that? I want answers, game, and you're not giving them to me. It's weird, is what I'm saying. So they continue on their way through this temple, through a bunch of traps no vampire could survive. Okay, but like, you have a vampire in the party, even though your entire creed says you shouldn't. And she's now bound by the soul to your, like, lead dude. So if she dies, he's definitely also gonna die. So sending them both into this place that will kill any vampires, by your own words, seems like a bad idea, doesn't it? But okay. And unfortunately, the relic gets stolen by vampires. And unfortunately, Jeremy kind of gets turned into a vampire. Because now capture is no longer an option. Even though every vampire in this temple is definitely dead. And they shouldn't have been able to escape with the seal that they stole to destroy the moon. Because the traps would kill any vampire except for Eliza, for reasons that aren't ever explained, and Jeremy should be dead too because of that, and also he should be dead of that because he's now a vampire, and also he should have just been captured because no one actually thought about anything this game was written with, is what I'm saying. And his former friends toss him into a pit, and his life gets saved by his partner now, Eliza, who now go on a rampage to try and recover the artifact and sort of get revenge on his friends a little bit, kinda, to find a way to sort of undo their soul bond. And honestly, this entire plot is a big MacGuffin hunt from start to finish, and it kind of goes sort of nowhere up until the end. Then there's a little bit of a twist. It's pretty underwhelming, and then just sort of, for some reason, at literally the last moment, they introduce a new villain, and then a secondary new villain who is an old villain who, but it's a whole thing. The point is, I don't really think the plot really knows what it's trying to be. Across the playthrough, you'll end up running into characters who kind of test Jeremy's sort of morality, or more accurately, I guess, humanity. You end up getting choices between helping vampires or just, you know, being a vampire-hating bigot like the rest of them. And, like, having played through the game, I don't know why you would ever side with the humans. because they're kind of unlikable and just straight up racist to the vampires. So yeah, it also feels like it's kind of going for an odd couple sort of thing, where you've got the mismatched vampire hunter being physically bonded to the vampire he hates with a passion that he definitely shouldn't have captured and just murdered, with his whole creed literally being told to you later that they don't capture. But okay, I'm dwelling on that, but seriously, this plot makes no sense. But it feels like it doesn't really work with the whole odd couple angle, because at no point does it really feel like their relationship kind of really develops all that much. They have so few interactions in the game, even though they're kind of stuck together, and they kind of seem at each other's throats pretty much the whole way through until after the final boss, and even then it feels really forced that they're not. It's kind of weird, and I made the choices in this game to again side with the vampires, so like I feel like they should at least have a bit of a better understanding of each other than they end up having. Again, the writing in this game, not exactly top tier. The plot, it's not super well written. Some of the lines are really, really bad, and like almost laughably so. So, you know, there's that. But if you're looking for a story in a game to take seriously, this is not that one. Also, the game very, very, like, impotently sort of sets up a sequel at the end, but I mean, there is no sequel to this, and the way it's set up is so really just weak that I think that was kind of the point. They realized they probably weren't going to get a sequel, so they wanted to sort of set one up just on the off chance, but it feels like it doesn't even commit to that. The gameplay is sort of like a top-down kind of Diablo game, but with like very, very, very ridiculously light puzzle-solving elements. Literally, it's just hit a color-corresponding pressure plate to make a thing happen, and some very light platforming elements. Now, I want to address the platforming here for just a sec, because this game has falling damage, and like really, really strict falling damage. If you do not take the exact express route down a ledge that they want you to take, you will die instantaneously. Like, very early on, I ended up running into this thing where they want you to jump down this cliff, and every time I did, I died. And I would have to respawn at like a checkpoint at the start of the level, which cost me like 3 minutes. And what I was supposed to do was to jump down onto these like tiny little platforms that were just kind of out of sight. Yeah, the camera's not exactly stellar, by the way. And you're just expected to know exactly where to jump, and if you just miss-aim your jump or something, you will just flat out die. The platforming in this game is very, very harsh like that. And instantly failing platforming challenges by taking fall damage and resetting you and costing you several minutes up to your last checkpoint, that's just bad. Especially when you're expected to exactly go down that way, you know? That's not good. Outside of that, again, it is a fairly standard Diablo-style sort of top-down, hacky-slashy, or shootery game. It depends which character you play as, because you can swap between the two of them. But I think the only reason there's even two characters here is for, like, co-op. And I don't normally talk about multiplayer because I feel like it shouldn't have any bearing on a game's quality, as I've talked about many times before. But it's worth knowing that if you're getting this game for co-op, it's local only. But if you do play this with someone, it's definitely going to tell you who's on the bottom rung of your friendship, because you can either play as Jeremy, the guy who has to stand next to everything and smack them with their sword, or you can play as Eliza, the character equipped with 2 crossbows who can handle any problem from an entire township away on a different height plane that no enemy can ever touch. There's not really any reason to ever play as Jeremy in this game. Like, literally, and by the end of the game, after the tutorial, I didn't. I beat the game with Eliza at level 20, and Jeremy at level 1 with, like, 19 unspent skill points because I had no use for him. Eliza can handle literally every problem on her own, because the AI isn't smart enough to try and climb environments or get around stuff, and their detection is very, very dumb. Like, there's very clearly a set area where they'll attack you from, and you can sit there outside their detection range and just shoot them, and they'll run up to you, and then turn around and run away. And they'll be happy to let you shoot them in the back to do so. In fact, that's pretty much the entirety of the gameplay right there, but up until like the last quarter of the game, where they introduce these enemies with shields that can kind of block all your damage, but Eliza gets grenades that can just break them, so there's not really much there other than just some resource management and buying some new grenades every level. It's not overly complicated. There's not a lot of different enemies to fight either. Really, you've got a standard humanoid enemy, and then the standard humanoid enemy with a shield. That's the majority of what you've got. Sometimes those humanoid enemies will swap to a crossbow to try and hit you at a range, but they're usually very, very incompetent, and even if they do, it's very easy to just sort of walk out of that attack range, although there is no real defensive tech in this game. Unfortunately, again, these kind of games, having a dodge or like a block or something to play defensively, it would be better, but given the fact that you can handle any problem from an entire country away on a different vertical plane, shooting enemies like you're in Doom, just sort of gesturing in their vague direction, making them die because the hit detection is just kind of weird like that. Yeah, it's kind of not the most precise system ever. It is interesting that you can play as Eliza as sort of like a twin stick shooter. You have to hold down the right bumper to keep shooting, but you can use your second stick to aim, but the game's generous auto aim kind of already does that for you, so there's no real reason to do so. And the auto aim is kind of so intense that it will actually wrestle control away from the right stick every now and then. I remember running into like a horde of enemies and sometimes thinking, okay, I want to take this specific enemy out, so I'm going to actively aim at them. We'll need to have the auto aim say, nope, you're targeting the guy directly behind him, or the guy to his left, or the guy to his right, or the guy directly behind you, because that's just what I choose to shoot at, even though you're clearly aiming in the different direction. Yeah, it's not the most precise game ever, nor is it the most complex. There's not a ton of different enemies, 2 humans, I think there's like one kind of vague trap monster, a couple of bosses, and like, not including bosses, 2 monster types, and it's a shame because the monsters are really, really cool in this game, but outside of the bosses, there's 2 of them, and if we include bosses, there's 4 of them. The rest of the time, you're just kind of shooting the same generic 2 dudes over and over again. And sure, they might reskin them every now and then, but they just behave entirely identically. You can use your vampire powers to push and pull bits of the environment to set off traps and knock people down, and this is kind of a neat feature because it's utilizing sort of an in-game physics system to try and hurt your opponents, which is cool, but it's very, very random. And the way they actually explain your vampire like pull and push system is really awkwardly badly explained at the beginning, because the game makes you swap between the 2 characters forcefully during the tutorial, but after a certain point they just kind of stop doing that. So I was playing Eliza at this point and they were saying, okay, use X while sucking blood to heal. Again, that's kind of a cool feature, to pull enemies towards you. Except everything I did made Eliza push the enemies away, and that's because Eliza only has a push ability and Jeremy only has a pull ability. I guess the idea is Jeremy is supposed to hit things up close, whereas Eliza's supposed to push things away, but the way they explain it in-game is overly confusing and bad for no reason. I'm not saying they should have wrestled control away from you to show off that one of these characters can do one thing versus the other, but they could have at least included it in the text box. You know, one character can do this, the other can do that, or something. There's not really any reason for them to have explained it, or, you know, rather not explained it the way they did. Now, as a Diablo game, one of the most important things you can do is find cool loot. And in this game, each character only gets one type of weapon. Eliza gets crossbows and Jeremy gets swords, and while they do get progressively stronger and they do add some particle effects, they don't really look all that more intimidating or interesting or anything. And at least with Eliza, because again I didn't really bother with Jeremy because why would I? That would be actively shooting myself in the foot to play the game worse. She only got like 4 armor sets and 2 of them looked identical. Now granted, they were the nicest looking set. She gets like this really cool set of white like bone armor that looks really, really cool on her, but like there's just not that much loot. And sure, you're actively upgrading yourself as you play through the game, but there's just not really all that much there, nor is it the most exciting to see. And all the best stuff to equip your characters in one way or another is bought from the trader at the store. So like there's no real excitement to finding something in the field other than just, okay, I can sell this and buy something nice later. That's what it ends up boiling down to, and that's just disappointing for a game that's kind of sort of being like a Diablo or Gauntlet style game, you know? Very little excitement in the encounters, very little excitement in the loot. It's just sort of a very bland and generic experience. Not bad, mind you. If you turn down your expectations really, really low, I had fun with the game, but it's really unremarkable. This is, at its core, sort of like the definition of a junk food game. You put it in, you play it, you stop, you never touch it again, you forget you ever played it in the first place. It's not bad, but it's far from great. Now, the overall presentation of Blood Knights is subpar, to be put diplomatically. The game doesn't look particularly great. The individual models look very, very awkward. The best looking characters look really bloody generic, and the worst characters just look very off-putting. They don't animate terribly well. I remember watching this one cutscene, and this priest guy was talking to us, and for some reason, Eliza's mouth flaps kept flapping up and down like she was talking, which was weird. And it was like the final cutscene too, so I don't want to show it to spoil it, but like, yeah, the animation's a little bit weird. Some characters don't move their mouth at all when they talk, which is not ideal, and, you know, the characters just don't look all that great. Sure, I do like Jeremy's giant cut-in-half chest plate that you can surely replace with other loot if you ever bother investing in him, but there's not that much loot. It doesn't really make your character look all that incredibly badass, and it's very, very generic. You've got a guy who wears a bunch of armor and a girl who wears basically a skimpy bikini of armor. You know, it's your traditional fantasy stuff that's not terribly believable, but, you know, I wish they at least put a little bit more emphasis on more loot, and they just made it more and more fantastical and insane. The most extreme armor we got was, again, sort of Eliza's bone armor, which was probably the nicest looking gear in the game. And again, all the enemies look very, very generic. The monsters do look good, but even if we include the boss monsters, that's like 4, so there's that. The final boss is kind of interesting, at least in the fact that he's wearing some incredibly garish armor, but that's sort of it. And the rest of the time you're fighting, again, the same 2 human dudes. They're just slightly reskinned every now and then, and even then, rarely is that ever the case. The environments don't look particularly interesting, nor do any of the real set pieces. It's just not a great looking game. And audio-wise, the soundtrack is actually okay. I don't think it's great, and I don't think it's memorable, but at least it had some nice action-y bits, and, you know, in the moment, during the loading screens or whatever, it's like, yeah, alright, this isn't too bad, I kinda like this. The voice acting is, for the most part, atrocious. I do appreciate how much the final boss really seems to enjoy overacting and popping his audio. He was clearly having a fun day that day, although I think everyone was kind of using pretty low-quality mics. Eliza, at least, has 3 different sound bites for her jumping. One of them sounds like she recorded it in like a completely different room because it just sounds like she's a mile away from the microphone. It's really odd. Pretty much everyone else, with the exception of protagonist Jeremy, sounds pretty awful, and I think part of that is bad direction. Part of it's just the material they had to work with, which was awful, but also I just don't think these are terribly experienced voice actors that were doing all that great a job. Although, again, I want to highlight generic protagonist man guy Jeremy. His voice actor is actually, you know, given the performance of a lifetime. He's actually trying. You can see that he's actually doing a pretty good job. Now, unfortunately, that's relative to everything else in here, but you know what? I give him a pass. He did a good job with his delivery. He had some pretty solidly delivered lines. He was clearly the best of this whole situation for what that was. He actually did a genuinely good job. Overall, the presentation of this game is rough. If you're expecting a top-tier game in terms of presentation, you're probably going to be disappointed. Now, if you want a copy of Blood Knights on Steam, I am seeing it right now for $11.50. That's not what I would pay for this. Fortunately, I didn't pay for this. Good old Sly Boots hooked me up with this, as he likes to send me cool and interesting and weird Steam things, and this was definitely one of those. I don't think this game is awful. Honestly, my time with it, I did enjoy it, but it's hard to recommend just flat out because of that. First of all, if you're the kind of person who enjoys a long game, it should be worth noting that my entire first playthrough, and bear in mind I died a lot from falling damage and just messing around, I beat this game in 3 hours. So it's not a very long game. But in terms of quality and the experience you'll get with this, it's at best sort of like a bad knockoff of Diablo, you know? I think if you're bored of Diablo and you're bored of Sacred 2 and you've for some reason decided not to play Ninth Dawn 3 or Throne Quest Deluxe as I've recommended in my Game of the Year list, this might be fun for a game you pick up as a game to goof on for an evening and then never play again. But I wouldn't recommend spending more than like $5 on this game, and even that feels a bit excessive. I think you can have some fun with this game. I certainly did myself, but it's not a great game. It's not even really a good game, but it can be entertaining for a little while anyway. It's just sort of a fun, low-tier game, but you gotta go in there expecting basically nothing and get this game on deep discount. Once again, thanks to Sly Boots for hooking me up with this. Again, I think I saw this on Xbox 360 being sold for like $1 perennially back when the Xbox One came out as one of those games along with Farming Simulator that just was the only thing that was available on sale for the 360. And I kind of see why. I feel like this game isn't going to make a lot of money at its full price, and I don't think it's doing its best job to try and entice people to play, because it's honestly not that great a game. There's some neat moments. Hell, a boss you fight very early on basically gets kitted out with a Gundam made out of flesh and viscera, and, you know, spoilers for later, but you do get to equip one just before the final boss fight, and then you lose it, which kind of sucks, but it gives you a nice sense of power for at least a few moments. And, you know, it has some fun moments. But between the frustrating platforming, the kind of awkward, very, very overly simplified puzzles, the lack of interesting or different enemies, the lack of interesting enemy designs, the really depressingly lack of interesting weapons and armor. Seriously, these kind of games really thrive on your characters getting really cool stuff. And while it does show up on your characters, and that's something I will always praise about any game, you get like 4 options for armor, and 2 of them were pretty much identical. So yeah, this game does not do the whole Diablo thing with any real degree of competency. It's playable, it can be kind of fun for a little while if it's not a little bit confusing in its tutorial, but overall it's not a great game, and if I were to recommend it, it would be go in there with very low expectations, buy it on deep discount, and maybe just have a fun night to goof around with. Overall, Blood Knights is not a great game, but under some very specific circumstances, it can be a fun game.
Jeremy, you and I, we had something, didn't we? It could have been wonderful. It could have been...
What the hell did you do?
Couldn't you see? She did it again.
She was defeated. She could have told us more about...
She was still dangerous. She was still playing with you. And
What?
you are still too soft.